right?
Right.
So let me see. I share the screen, cerebral cortex. And let's see again the brain image. This is the brain, and there is a spinal cord and medulla and pons, and this is cerebellum, and this is midbrain here in the center of the brain, midbrain, and up to the midbrain there is thalamus, and right side there is a hypothalamus. And here there is a corpus callosum. It sounds around like this.
Oh.
And the last layer, big layer, is it is surrounded our like skull, and this is cerebral cortex. So here, so when most people think about human brain, they think of and picture the cerebral cortex. Yeah, they usually think of that. And the gray wrinkled surface of the brain is actually very thin layer of densely packed neurons. There's a lot of neurons, and the neurons just connected into each other. And also there are a lot of wrinkles. This layer covers the rest of the brain, including most of the structures we have described. When we are born, our cerebral cortex is full of neurons. But the neurons are not yet well connected. As we develop and learn, the dendrites of the neuron in the cerebral cortex grow and connect with other neurons. This process forms the complex neural web you now have in your brain. The surface of the cerebral cortex is wrinkled, so this wrinkle is really functional. To increase the available surface area of the brain. The more wrinkles, the more surface area contained within our skull. If our cerebral cortex were not wrinkled, our skull would have to be 3 square feet to hold all those neural connections. And next one is hemisphere. Actually, the cerebral cortex is divided into 2 hemispheres, left and right. The hemispheres looks like mirror image of one another, but they exert some differences in function. They have different function. The left hemisphere gets sensory message and controls the motor function of the right half of the body. And the right hemisphere gets sensory messages and control the motor function of the left half of the body. So this is called contralateral control. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay. Researchers are currently investigating other differences between the hemispheres, such as the possibility that the left hemisphere may be more active during logic and sequential tasks, and the right during spatial and creative tasks. However, these generalizations need to be researchers further before conclusions are drawn. This specialization of function in each hemisphere is called brain lateralization, or hemispheric specialization. Most of this research in differences between the hemisphere is done by examining split brain patients. The patients whose corpus callosum, the nerve bundle that connects two hemispheres, has been cut to treat severe epilepsy. And the operation was pioneered by neuropsychologists Roger Ferry and Michael Kazanza. Split brain patients also cannot orally refer to information only presented to the right hemisphere, since the spoken language content centers of the brain are usually located in the left hemisphere. And areas of the cerebral cortex. When you study the cerebral cortex, think of it as a collection of different areas and specific cortices. Think of the cerebral cortex as 8 different lobes, 4 on each hemisphere: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. Some of the major functions of this part of the brain that are relevant to the AP test and mentioned here, any area of the cerebral cortex that it is not associated with receiving sensory information or controlling muscle movements is labeled as an association area. Although specific functions are not known for each association area, these areas are very active in various human thoughts and behaviors. For example, association areas are thought to be responsible for complex, sophisticated thoughts like judgment and humor. Thought like judgment and humor. So, and next one is frontal lobes. Frontal lobes are large area of the cerebral cortex, which is located at the top front part of the brain behind the eyes. The interior or front of the frontal lobe is called the prefrontal cortex. And let's look at this one. So this is our cerebral, the lobes of the cerebral cortex. And here, this is frontal lobe. There is eye here, this way, this side.
Behind the eye.
Yeah. And this is parietal lobe next to here. And here, sensory cortex. And here, motor cortex. And this is occipital lobes. And this is temporal lobes. So you might know where the lobes located now. So this prefrontal lobes, cortex, prefrontal lobe here, this one, is thought to play a critical role This is really important in directing thought processes. The prefrontal cortex is said to act as the brain's central executive and is believed to be important in parsing consequences, pursuing goals, and maintaining emotional control. So, because of maintaining emotional control, if your prefrontal cortex wants just to harm, you cannot easily control your temper. So suddenly like shout and show some anger, then it is because of the prefrontal cortex like problem.
Oh.
And researchers believe this part of the brain is responsible for the abstract thought and emotional control. The story of Piney's Gauge mentioned previously exemplifies some of the functions of the prefrontal cortex. The Gage's limbic system was separated from his frontal lobe in an accident. So there was an accident and he became a patient and his brain was separated from his frontal lobe. So at that time, doctors reported that he lost control of his emotion. He just before the accident, he was very generous and reliable and quiet person. But after the accident, he suddenly changes. He just lost control of his temper, emotion, and became impulsive and animalistic. So that's why this prefrontal cortex is really important for human. So it makes human more humanistic.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see.
So do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it controls, this part controls our emotions.
Yeah. So in most people, the frontal lobe in the left hemisphere, contains one of the two spatial areas responsible for language processing. Some left-handed people's language centers are in the right hemisphere. Broadcast area is called broadcast area is in the frontal lobe and is responsible for controlling the muscles involved in producing speech. So once the broadcast area is harmed, you have some difficulty to say like verbal, like function.
Oh, just like
Damages,
when you're in stroke.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Damage to broadcast area might leave us unable to make the muscle movement needed for speech. And the other is Wernicke's area. It's located in the temporal lobe. So, the Broca area and Wernicke's area are really like important for our daily lives. So, a thin vertical strip at the back of the frontal lobes parts from the eyes is called the motor cortex. This part of the cerebral cortex sends signals to our muscles, controlling our voluntary movement. The top of the body is controlled by the neurons at the bottom of this cortex, processing down the body as we go up the cortex. So, top of the motor cortex controls the feet and the toes of the body. So, up to now, do you have any questions?
No questions so far in this one.
Okay, it is clear. So, and then next one is parietal lobes. And parietal lobes are located behind the frontal lobes, behind, but still on the top of the brain. The parietal lobes contain the sensory cortex. So it is a middle sensory cortex, which is located right behind the motor cortex in the frontal lobe. The sensory cortex is a thin vertical strip that receives incoming touch sensations from the rest of our body. The sensory cortex is organized similarly to the motor cortex. The top of the sensory cortex receives sensations from, let me see, the bottom of the body, progressing down the cortex to the bottom, which processes signals from our face and head. And next one is occipital lobes. Our occipital lobes are at the very back of our brain. Very back, parties from our eyes. This is somewhat anti-intuitive, since one of the major functions of this lobe is to interpret messages from our eyes in our visual cortex. So impulses from the retinas in our eyes are sent to the visual cortex to be interpreted. Impulses from the right half of each retina are processed in the visual cortex in the right occipital lobe. Impulses from the left part of each retina are sent to the visual cortex in our left occipital lobes. And next one is temporal lobes. The temporal lobes process sound sensed by our ears. Sound waves are processed by the ears, and it turns into neural impulses and interpreted in our auditory cortices. The auditory cortex is not lateralized like the visual cortex are. Sound received by the left ear is processed in the auditory cortex in both hemispheres. And the second language area is located in the temporal lobe. Wernicke's area. So previously we just talked about Broca's and Wernicke's area. So Wernicke's area interpret both written and spoken speech. Damage to this area would affect our ability to understand language. Our speech might sound fluent but lack the proper syntax and grammatical structure needed for meaningful communication. And next one is brain plasticity. So researchers know some of the functions of different areas of the cerebral cortex. They have also discovered that the brain is somewhat plastic or flexible. Yeah, it makes sense. While these cortices and lobes usually perform the functions already mentioned, other parts of the brain can adapt themselves to perform other functions if needed. So you already know that the cerebral cortex is made up of a complex network of neurons connected by dendrites that grow to make new connections. Since dendrites grow throughout our lives, if one part of the brain is damaged, dendrite might be able to make new connections in another part of the brain that would be able to take over the functions usually performed by the damaged part of the brain. Dendrites grow most quickly in younger generation. Researchers know that younger brains are more plastic and are more likely to be able to compensate for damage. So this is the very characteristic of the brain. And endocrine system. Another part of human biology relevant to psychology is the endocrine system. This is a kind of system of glands that secrete hormones that affect many different biological processes in our bodies. As mentioned previously, the endocrine system is controlled in the brain by the hypothalamus. The endocrine system is complex, but a few elements of the entire process are especially relevant to psychologists. And let's look at adrenal glands. It produces adrenaline, which signals the rest of our body to prepare for fight or flight. This response was mentioned earlier in connection with the autonomic nervous system. The part of our nervous system that controls involuntary responses, such as heart rate and blood pressure.
Like when you get too excited.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then ovaries and tests. So woman's ovaries and men's tests produce our sex hormones like estrogen per woman and testosterone per woman. Maybe you've heard this hormone, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah. Research show that levels of this hormone in men and women may partially explain gender differences, demonstrated in certain experiments and situations. So there is a gay and then transgender. Then
All
some
right.
psychologist says maybe they're like these hormones are just imbalanced. So
Mm.
because these hormones make woman more like feminine and make men more masculine. But
Mm.
the transgender and like this kind of people just their sex hormones are imbalanced. So that's why they just show that like something somewhat like mixed, you know. So this is one of theory. Mm. And genetics. Besides the functioning of the brain and nervous system, another biological factor that affects human thought and behavior is genetics. Most human traits, like body shape, introversion, or temper, result from the combined effects of nature. This is our genetic code. And nurture, the environment where we grow up and live. Psychological researchers attempt to determine how much nature and nurture contribute to human traits. So there is a basic genetic concept. So every human cell contains 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. The genetic material that make up chromosome in is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Certain segments of DNA control the production of specific protein that control some human trait. These discrete segments are called genes. Genes can be dominant or recessive. If we inherit two recessive genes for a particular trait, that trait will be expressed in any other combination of genes. The dominant trait is expressed. Psychological researchers investigate how different combinations of genes create tendencies for physical and behavioral traits. And now let's look at twins case study. Since identical twins share all the same genetic material, researchers study them in order to examine the influence of genes on human traits. In one famous study, Thomas Burchard found more than 100 identical twins who are given up for adoption and raised in different families. The study compared hundreds of traits and concluded about the relative influences of genetic and the environment on specific trait. For example, the study found the correlation coefficient of 0.69 on the IQ test for identical twins raised apart and a 0.88 for identical twins living together. Then it shows that the environment has some effect on IQ score. Since twins raised in the same family have more similar IQs. However, the IQs of twins raised apart are still highly correlated, demonstrating that IQ is also heavily influenced by genetics. So, twin studies like this one have been criticized in one important way, however. Even twins raised in separate families obviously share very similar physical appearances. This physical similarity may cause others to treat them in similar ways, creating the same effective psychological environment for both twins. This similarity in environment might explain the high correlation that Burchard attribute to genetic influence. Okay, so today, post time is almost